Psychotechnologies Live. Welcome to a mysterious episode of Psychotechnologies Live. We have with us Jason Longstone. Jason Longstone is a software and systems architect, former freemason, and has appeared on Layman's show multiple times. He's got some Medium articles and interviews. Check the link in the description after the show. So, guys, I'm super excited for today's show. We're going to talk about religion. So we haven't really done this one yet. We've talked about religion like from the inside, from practitioner's perspective, but from actually building a religion. And so, like, for me, this is really cool because I'm struggling to build my religion. I find it very difficult, and it's awesome to get some help. So, Jason, how do I build a religion? Can you walk me through it?
Well, for me, I started off in the Western mystery traditions with adjacent to the Builders of the Adatum group. It was called Ancient Builders of the North. After that, I went into mainstream Freemasonry. And actually, before that, I did a deep dive into shamanic practices and paleolithic shamanism and stuff like that. So looking at the arc of it over time, all religious experience has its basis in paleolithic shamanism. And then as you move forward through time, you get cultural and codification, and then you reach a bifurcation point where you have a set of rules or a set of tools. Orthodox traditions use a set of rules to impart moral pedagogies or knowledge. Mystery traditions are teaching you how to use a set of tools in order to come to a deeper place of understanding through the application of tools and mentorship. So they're approaching the same space, but they're two very, very different methodologies that roughly map onto system 1, fast learning, and system 2, slow learning.
Wow, that was way more concise than I was expecting. That's awesome. Okay, so let's go through it. So it's Paleolithic, then practice, then rules, you said?
Sorry, from Paleolithic shamanism, which is like kind of raw, elemental, unstructured, very locus specific, you reach a point where there becomes some kind of cultural and codification. And that codification follows one of two pathways. You're either using system 1, learning rules, learning orthodoxy, or you're engaging system 2, learning systems and processes and pushing your knowledge that way. So set of rules versus set of tools. Two approaches to moral pedagogy, but they're based on our kind of cognitive patterns in the first place. So they're not two system 1 and system 2 learning pathways.
Yeah, I'm liking the tools one version of that.
Right. So what do you mean by tools? Is that the next question?
Yeah. So let's go through them all. What do you mean by Paleolithic shamanism, and then what do you mean by tools and rules? Well, let's start with that. So is this like sort of like how does the unconscious work essentially, or?
It's the human attempt to try to map the unconscious over the course of our history from 30,000 years ago into Middle Stone Age, through the Neolithic, through the Bronze Age, Iron Age, into more contemporaneous times. So you've got different competing influences with that, both in terms of population size, geography, lineage of the tradition that's there, but they all end up centering around a certain set of design patterns or means of engagement. I think you guys have kind of covered that before, the whole idea of having design patterns, or I think you use the term energy patterns. So we have these architectural patterns where different pieces can switch out, and then if you're following a rote set of rules, then you learn the 10 commandments, and that's the kind of the depth of your knowledge. Whereas if you're using a mystery tradition, a set of tools, so this basically comes down to the idea of the object lesson. So every mystery tradition will have some kind of object lesson associated with the degree. So in Freemasonry, the squares or compass are very well known. So
the what?
With the square and the compass.
Compass, yeah.
So every mystery tradition has object level lessons, you said?
Yes, that's part of what distinguishes the mystery tradition from Orthodox religion. So the mystery tradition will use some specific object. In Freemasonry, it's the the working tools of working with stone. They will use that physical object in order to teach a moral lesson through metaphor.
So my hunch suddenly in hearing this is that if I think of like Zen is trying to get you to really, the lesson is the lesson or something. They're like really trying to hit the lesson without tools. You do nothing. You pay attention to your breath. You open focus. Is that
like they're using they would use experience as the thing that you use to learn, and then Freemasons use masonry, like stones and stuff.
Physical tools within Freemasonry, within Zen, the object might be so it's a metaphorical object rather than a physical object, but they're trying to create the same role for a way of tackling or engaging some space of experience using a specific tool within a specific scope. And then you start to build those tools out, and then you broaden capacity overall.
Okay, that's so cool. Can you walk us through that with because I don't know a lot about Freemasonry. I don't think a lot of the other people do as well. So like using this framework, can you like walk us through? So like, I guess like how did they do that? That seems hard.
Maybe like pick an example.
I can kind of walk you through the structure of Freemasonry, at least within the York Rite and some of the different degrees. So everyone who becomes a Freemason has to go through what's called the Blue Lodge or the Craft Lodge, which is the first 3 degrees of the Entered Apprentice, the Fellow Craft, and the Master Mason. Beyond the Master Mason, all Masons are considered equal. You might have rank and title for a district position or whatever else, but you're still considered equal within the body of that thing.
Okay.
So within the actual structures of lodges or Masonic bodies themselves, there are a series of what we call chairs or officers' positions. And the intent is to bring someone from the bottom chair and train them up through these different organizational roles all the way to the master's seat. So that should be the Masonic progression. Within the individual degrees themselves, the degree is basically a ritual where you put the candidate in a specific position within a narrative for them to experience that narrative for themselves and then run through that kind of narrative space. And then each of those degrees tack on like another piece of knowledge as you're kind of progressing through that to kind of fill out and round out the picture. So you're doing that at the individual level in terms of what it takes to run the organization and different chairs that are there. And then you're doing that. The other access or things that you're getting through ritual is principally memory work. So you need the aspect of discipline to be able to memorize the ritual, because if you're trying to read off the book and you're stumbling, then you're not giving something of value to whoever the next candidate is coming in.
Well, you're giving some stumbling.
So if you're going through that process of memorization, you should also be going through the process of trying to understand all of the words and context and everything that's in there. So from the first degree, you're admonished to make an advancement in Masonic knowledge every day. So that means taking any part of the ritual and just kind of digging into the occulted layers behind that. So occult just means hidden, more explicitly hidden within. And usually it's hidden either by our blind spots or because it's the kind of the shadow realm within. Or it's just things that we've placed constructs within our eyes that create blinders so we can't actually see what's behind the blinder.
Right. So how does that work? How do you do that?
Like you're literally trying to memorize something is the basic tool in this instance?
Yeah, so within this structure of the ritual and the narrative, there are different lectures that different officers are responsible for. So when I was in Royal Arch, I almost always did the mystical lecture for the Royal Arch degree, because that was something I could just drop from memory, like no problem. I've done a number of other lectures, but that was one that I committed to memory well enough, I could probably pop it off here if I was inside of a chapter or whatever.
Okay, so you've memorized like it's like essentially like scripture for Freemasons, right?
Well, it is a liturgy. The liturgy of Freemasonry is based off of the Old Testament. Within Freemasonry, it's all explicit. Like if you go into a Blue Lodge, if a Jewish person joins your lodge, the Torah must be on the altar. If a Muslim joins your lodge, the Quran must be on the altar. Whether or not they're actually in attendance, if they're a member of your lodge, their sacred book or volume of sacred law belongs on the altar.
Oh, Oh, so like Freemason is Christian, but it's also like
The
multi-denominational.
basis is out of the Old Testament until you get to the Knights Templar, which is explicitly Christian. But everything up until that point, sorry, I'm less familiar with the Scottish rite, but within the York rite, all of that is open to anyone of any faith. You do have to go through the 3 questions of believing in a higher being, and you can look this up yourself. But once you're in, yeah, it basically so we don't use the term Bible within the ritual. It's called the volume of sacred law, because it's not just the Bible. It might be someone else's volume of the sacred law.
Okay, so that's
And
interesting. Oh, sorry.
So the principal point of Freemasonry is to make good men better. So it probably has more in common with Buddhism in terms of a practice, a moral practice, than it does with Christianity, because it doesn't care about the hereafter or whatever else. It's about the here and now.
It's very interesting. I can see the benefits of creating a structure that is designed to coexist with other existing religious structures. Like it's designed, like you said, make good men better. It's and like
it's a religion that's not a religion.
well, it was like, I guess that means it couldn't get rejected by various religious structures, because it's explicitly not about.
Well, Catholics were excommunicated, or if you're
really
a Catholic and joined the lodge up until the late 60s, you could be excommunicated
from Catholicism.
Yeah, there were only a couple of countries in Europe who were to follow that edict, but by and large, yeah, since it was the Friday the 13th when Philip the Fair and Pope Gregory went after the Templars. That was it. Like, what was that? 1307, all the way up until late 1960s.
Wow.
So this is badass. This is like sorry.
So
sorry, keep
one
going.
of the principal things in Freemasonry is that you join and you engage of your own free will and accord. Organizations or people who have big issues with control aren't really cool with that.
Right. Because they're trying to control, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I'm becoming very interested in Freemasonry.
Okay, so most Grand Lodges will have a page called "What Does It Take to Be a Freemason?" So with Ontario, it's the Grand Lodge of Ontario in the province of Canada. I was also a member of BC and Yukon when I lived there for a while. They have a really excellent educational site where there's anything that's like not explicit to the secrets, which is like the modes of recognition, some of the passwords, everything else is like fairly available within public if you actually do some searching for it and can get past some of the conspiracy nonsense. But the Grand Lodge of BC and Yukon actually has an excellent education resource out there.
I have been to, so Sydney has a beautiful museum of Freemasonry. Like they have various objects that are incredibly well decorated. And it was stunning. Like the one thing I picked up from going to that museum is that Freemasonry loves symbols and loves symbolism and loves representing the depth. Maybe it was also my tour guide in that museum, but it loves representing things symbolically and then filling their objects with symbolism, like the stars or the...
If I can remember the quote, it's a system of morality veiled in allegory, illustrated by symbols.
Right. Yeah, I just remember all of these objects that were beautifully painted, beautifully decorated, the rooms where the meetings happen, with having beautiful woodworking, and very, very well decorated and very well kept.
And within the structure of different Masonic bodies, the actual organization of that room will be different. So within the Craft Lodge, you have the master and past warden sitting up in the east. There will be the altar in the center with 3 lights around it. When you go into Royal Arch, it's more laid out like a Jewish temple. So you have the 12 flags of the tribes of Israel running up and down the center, and then there's other stuff laid out related to finding the temple upon Zerubbabel's return. And then in Cryptic Rite, it kind of goes back into the building of the temple again. And then the Knights Templar goes a little bit earlier in Zerubbabel's story and his travels. There's a couple of other degrees in there, like the Knights of Malta. and then finally the Knights Templar. And then I was also involved in Allied Masonic degrees, which is kind of a body that collects lesser known degrees. It's been around for quite some time. I was in York Rite Sovereign College, and one that I joined didn't stay with very long. We had the fancy name of Holy Royal Arch Knights Templar Priests. But the original that one was, it was pretty much straight out of the King James, and I'm like, nah, not feeling it so much. I found with some of the other bodies, there was much more depth in terms of being able to understand esoteric tradition and being able to dig into that a little bit more. So you mentioned the religion that's not a religion. For me, it's a mystery tradition. Can we just call it that? It is within that spiritual space. It is not defined by orthodoxy. We already have a term for that, and the term is mystery tradition.
Okay. So I'm sensing a little like anger, I guess, that like they're trying to like reinvent something that already exists.
Yeah, there's a lot of blue sky stuff going on, which I get to a degree, but do your fucking homework.
Well, that's why you're here, like, right? this is the liminal space doing their homework, is talking to you right now.
Yeah. So I haven't seen almost anybody in this kind of liminal IDW integral space who actually has any experience with extant mystery traditions. I mean,
yeah, I didn't know they were real.
Like
I didn't
California, there's at least the English lodges could trace them a long way back. The esoteric roots of Freemasonry go back to Egypt. And I think the cultural roots of it actually go back to the Paleolithic or Neolithic period, where they were building these huge stone structures. I think there's an aspect of cultural continuity along that. We don't have clear direct lineage, but the same types of tools keep getting used over and over again and refined over and over again. And I think that's the same aspect of what's happening in terms of understanding religion, spirituality, and psychology, is that we build up these models, the models fail, and if we're intelligent about it, we don't get rid of what was there. We figure out where the error was, and then we refine that model. And that process of refinement should be ongoing. So
right.
It's coming back to what we talked about pre-going live. In this religion that's not a religion, what I see as the optimal foundation points for that are something like TOGAF, the Open Group Architectural Framework, which is about developing enterprise architecture in a non-prescriptive way, taking that process idea and merging it with something like Freemasonry, or the structure that's already been built up by Freemasonry. I don't necessarily think that the liturgy of Freemasonry would speak to modern people as well as it used to, but I think that the pattern and organization of ritual, the whole piece of putting someone in the specific spot of a narrative in order for them to experience that story. So you get
I do that
with the story, and then you get system 2 with the object lessons. So there's a much more integrated approach here. It's to the individual. It's about creating individuation rather than compliance. So for me, this is a big part of
because you're showing the person the experience.
It's not really there. Yes, you're putting them in that space so they can experience that narrative for themselves. Yeah,
dude, I do this to myself all the time, and I'm like go crazy because like it's like I don't know how to explain any of this stuff to anyone to like kind of do it together. That's why we've been like leaning into the shaman thing, where I'm like, okay, just do this, right? Like I'm just like bringing people along on adventures so that we can like have the narrative together. But you're telling me like, hey, there's a structure that already exists that's like this. This is actual shamanism is what you're describing.
It's
like structured shamanism. Yeah. That is amazing.
Further back, like the whole Moses' whole vision and everything, it has a tie to acacia, which contains DMT. There's other grasses within the Levant that have MAO inhibitors. So that's tied to Moses. The acacia also has a really significant role within the Masonic ritual as well. And I think at one point, Masons were actually tripping on DMT during these rituals. I don't think we've seen anything like that within the modern, everything that's come from the United Grand Lodge of England past, but there are echoes of that within the liturgy of the ritual itself.
So I'm Orthodox Jew background, and so you're saying Moses is the DMT one?
There
Possibly.
is some research out of Israel that came about 10 years ago. So they've done some analysis on some historical sacred texts and try to figure out which psychotropics and entheogens might have influenced that type of experience. And Moses in the burning bush was apparently DMT, and the acacia thing would make sense because it is endogenous to there's about 400 species of acacia endogenous to Northern Africa. I think there's like 50 or 75 that actually contain enough DMT to be useful in that direction, and then you need the monoamine oxidase inhibitor in order to stretch that out instead of just like burst to longer mystical experience.
You have me interested in like not just the Moses tradition, but every tradition's like creation story, and to start getting curious of like what type of drug has us seeing the vision of that type shape of creation story. Where like if I go like rainbow serpent, which is Australian Aboriginal, what type of support, maybe entheogenic support, would have you start seeing the world in the sense of a rainbow serpent instead of like the Garden of Eden, instead of another one again, which is super, super interesting to me.
Yeah, so some of this is going to be anchored into myth as well. And ancient myth stories. So there's a good YouTube channel called Krakenford. He's done some really interesting research in terms of story lineages and trying to track down what is the oldest human story, kind of going back 100,000 years in time, using the linguistic phylogenetics to figure out, okay, at this point it bifurcated, this story went off here with these additional characters, this one went off here with these characters, another branch up here with a few more characters, and they can kind of trace that narrative evolution over time. So this makes me want to swing back around to the idea that psychotechnologies are information technologies. One of the things you do within information technologies is have a source control. It doesn't mean the code base doesn't change. It means you track what those changes are. And if something catastrophically fails, you can do a rollback and a reset. But if you're just rolling along with no sense of history, you've got to do a forensic decomposition to go back and figure out what the hell went wrong.
Oh, fuck.
So if you have that trace of history, you can roll back and see what decision and impacts actually created that failure point.
And you're saying that Freemasonry tracks this stuff, so it's essentially like the dev logbook or something of.
To a degree, it is.
Religion.
I mean, there's lots of research into older Masonic rituals, rituals that have disappeared. There's one I think it's called the Copile Codex. I read through that, and it's pretty clearly Blue Lodge ritual from a different jurisdiction from mine. So there are variances, but from the structure of it, it's like this is obviously Blue Lodge stuff.
So let me ask a question.
I don't know what a Blue Lodge is.
Sorry, that's the first lodge of Masonry. It's called the Blue Lodge of the Craft Lodge, and that's the first 3 degrees of the Under Apprentice, the Fellow Craft, and the Master Mason.
So that's like the intro, like that's where people go first, or
yes.
The historically. Yeah, okay.
So
you have to go through the Blue or the Craft Lodge before you can either go to York Rite or Scottish Rite, and before you can advance in those other bodies.
Okay.
I want to throw in so a little. I'm going to be humbled by history and your understanding of history, but my little piece of this puzzle is that the Brothers Grimm went around Europe gathering fairy tales and sort of comparing them from different regions, and then they settled on. They sort of, my understanding is they sort of simplified what they found and settled on and wrote the book of fairy tales, as they decided was the one true shape of all the fairy tales. But my understanding is they kind of like deleted the details where one region might have had a slightly different version to another of each of the fairy tales. Like maybe it was a tall guy in one and a giant in the other, and maybe it wasn't actually a giant, it was an orc in another. But they condensed all the fairy tales. Does that mean that from the Freemason sort of perspective, a whole bunch of this, the revision notes was completely lost when they like smushed it all together into a single tradition?
Well, I think that's happened to a degree, and I think Freemasonry kind of became the repository for other traditions that were lost.
Right.
So when the Templar excommunication there's some evidence that some of the Templars escaped into northern Scotland to the Rosslyn Chapel.
Mm-hmm.
And the Sinclair family and their whole ties to the New World and all that other kind of stuff. But so the Craft Lodge and the chapter or the Royal Arch have always been tightly coupled together. But
The craft
pendant
lodge
degrees is the Blue Lodge for the first 3 degrees, like the Master Mason body, and then you have the Royal Arch, and there's 3 degrees in there. There's 4 in Europe and England, but we won't worry about that for now. There's the Mark Master Mason, Most Excellent Master, and then the Royal Arch Master. And then within the Cryptic Rite, oh, it's been a while and I can't even remember these.
I'm sorry, you just like remembered like 700 things and then said I'm sorry for the like 701st thing that you said I can't remember. I'm just like, wow, what a incredibly structural like I kind of want to ask a question about this. Like, you seem to be incredibly well structured internally, that like all of the details like this, then that, then that. Are you doing something internally to keep yourself organized or keep yourself in like is that something that you've received from maybe the order of the Freemasonry teaching, or to be structured?
I think memorization work helps. I'm a little bit ASCII, so that systematizing versus empathizing thing is definitely there. And so some people will use like the mental castle or the mental models in order to map memory. I always figured that was kind of a useless process. I want to take those memories and embed them and associate them with the actual map of the world. So the map is never going to be the territory, but the more coherent the map is to the territory, the more effective it's going to be in terms of actually being able to do things or use things.
Yeah. And you map them into action as well?
I mean, yeah, it should be. It should inform in some capacity, or otherwise it's just a passive exercise. So it's like taking a mushroom chip. You need to go through it, do the processing so that you come out different than when you went into it.
Yeah.
And then that's your checkpoint until you roll along. And it's like, oh, time for another error correction cycle. Let's go back and repeat that process again, get a little further. Error correction cycle. And then it's the same thing that's kind of happening at the cognitive level with the OODA loop. Like, there should be 2 OODA loops. So observe, orient, decide, act is something that comes out of combat. So the left brain or default mode network is doing this low level OODA loop. Ideally, the executive network should be running the second OODA loop. So when this hits an error condition, it pops up to here. This resolves error best it can at the time, whether it's a perfect or imperfect solution. This structural model gets updated and then it's able to keep running again. So you see with most people, there is no interplay between the default mode network and the executive network. The error correction mechanism, the metacognition, is just not happening.
For most people, yeah, it's super frustrating.
That's back to the system 1, system 2 learning pathways. System 1 is
I think we call that, like, we call people that can't do that NPCs, essentially.
Yeah, really they are. I mean, the default mode network is effectively artificial intelligence. That is what it is. If you want to train it, you need to use the same kind of mechanisms that you do with machine learning. You can either do, forget that, opponent processing, where you're giving it bad information and it has to sort out what's right, or you're giving it good information and making it extract what's out from there. But those series of methodologies need to be in play. You can't use single methodology. Plus, most of our behavior is just completely habituated anyways. So this thing's always going to run. It's not going away. The resource effort of being up here in executive network all the time is not going to happen because it's resource expensive, but it can't be shut off. And when people are totally left brain or in their mixed response, higher order cognition is gone. It's not accessible. If you frame something in a good versus evil story, you can drop someone's IQ by 10 to 15%. If you put them into distress, you can drop it by another 30%. That's enough to take someone from Mensa level back to the bell end of the bell curve. And don't forget, it's only 1 sigma below the mean, where the US Army thinks people are not intelligent enough to be trainable for any job in the Army. And that's about 15% of the population.
I am interested in what you said there. You said that you said it's never going to shut off, right? And I believe that, and I agree with you.
Is always going to work, and the default mode network is basically our waking state of consciousness. There's a difference between working with post hoc rationalization versus rational analysis. The limbic stuff isn't going away because the whole cognitive substructure is built on top of the limbic and emotional system, and then been repurposed or re-leveraged into other higher or more abstract functionality.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree, and also I don't have a good understanding or justification of why it is the case that it will never shut off, unless like I feel like I know that from deep meditative. I've meditated a lot, and like my chattery brain keeps coming back, and so I've kind of drawn the conclusion that keeps happening.
Delta,
yeah.
If you're deep into Delta or something, it might go off for a little bit, and
right.
The most current understanding of what psychotropics and entheogens are doing to the brain is turning off the default mode network, or suppressing it so that it is not driving the bus, at least for the time being, and then things can be restructured and reorganized.
So I'm super interested in, there's a couple of meditative traditions that claim that it can be turned off, and I think they're nuts, but I wonder what your take is on them claiming that you truly can turn that off.
Temporarily.
Right.
But I think
you could die.
I think where you get to this habituated network, if you're running it on factory default settings, it's never going to change, and it's not going to be terribly useful. The more you upgrade it, the more it approaches to what the executive network is able to do. And if there's a lot of interaction between those things, this model can be much more refined, where the balance, instead of like running low-level automaton stuff down here and higher cognition being up here, maybe it's more about this level, where there's less need to go back to the executive network to do the higher level refinement, because this has been more effectively tuned up. Right. So when you're going back here, you're doing minor corrections instead of trying to build things up from like completely new neural pathways from scratch.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a hunch
that's what you're doing with parenting, is like you're trying to build that, like with young kids, you're trying to build that network properly the first time.
Yeah, and this is the same thing you're doing with the AI training. It's like you're trying to take it from this space where it can handle a couple of rules to we're approaching predictive text and then artificial general intelligence up here.
Yeah, my general hunch is that the what you're trying to build is internal trust amongst the system, and when you have internal trust, then you can let it run on autopilot. But obviously, you need reason to trust as well, and so you need it to be proven that it is doing the correct thing. So you need to observe it, and when you decide that, oh yes, my intuitions are correct, that's when you can start to trust it and build better and better trust in your automatic system.
Demonstration of integrity, which means internal coherence.
Nice. Is that does that come from Freemasonry, or that's from you? Because you sound like you just translated what I said into your language. So I'm just curious where it come from.
We're on the same page, like the same kind of metaphors. This is just the language that I've come across before, or synthesized from other influences.
Right.
Because I mean, I haven't really invented anything. The small gestures and things like that. I'm not trying to do this from whole cloth. What I'm trying to do is where I think Peterson's interpretation of Nietzsche, I will contest. Instead of going back and wiping everything out, you are going back into the foundations and the substrate and rebuilding things up from there. Not out of whole cloth, but going back to the essential tools, the essential design patterns, and reinvigorating and building up from there. So it's not about starting from blank slate scratch, because that doesn't exist. What you are doing is parsing back into the lineage, into the history, into the service layer of cognition, and trying to figure out more of those pieces and bring out a more refined model from that.
And specifically to loop back to where we started, to encode tools and rules for ongoing groups of people to use and have a better life with.
Well, effective tools for day-to-day use, and effective tools for further exploration and refinement.
Gonna give Daniel a moment to.
Yeah, I mean, it just occurred. Yeah, bunch of stuff occurred to me. I don't even know where. Like, there's so many directions to go. I don't even know which direction we should go. I think maybe you seem annoyed about things, and
I would call that like passionate. Like deeply passionate about what he cares about.
No, deeply passionate, and then like annoyed at other people like missing some things that are obvious to you that are maybe not as obvious to them. And so
I'm
that's
only
sort of
annoyed if people. I'm only annoyed when people try to posture some kind of mastery of domain and they demonstrate that they don't know the fucking basics.
That annoys
pisses
me
me
as
off
well.
to no end.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
some of the stuff out of the Santa Fe or the stuff that was associated with Rebel Wisdom, like the Flow Genome Project, it's like you spent all these time learning about flow states from like tier 1 operators and stuff like that. So why did you come back with this non-rivalrous bullshit, which is basically a minor piece of economic theory that describes a queue, doesn't describe how the queue is supposed to work or anything else. And then you missed this entire fucking piece about stress inoculation.
Yeah.
Part of the thing with flow is like, you've got distress and eustress. Distress is going to compromise your system. Eustress is where you're trying to find that lean into the flow state where there's enough resistance, enough of a challenge, and enough potential of failure that you could actually optimize your growth cycle. So when you cut off concepts like stress inoculation, you've taken this whole fucking piece off the board and you've left us with some kumbaya bullshit. That pisses me off because you're robbing people of the opportunity to really understand what the fuck is going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I have a theory on
that. Makes me livid.
Yeah. Okay. I'm glad we brought that out. I have a theory on that. I think the way they're doing it is they're doing it in spaces that are the people are already in so much distress that if they say we're going to go zero distress, like they're still too far on the distress side. So I think they're like trying to claw their way back to a eustress situation.
There's some
but yeah, they're not self-aware.
Learning, all that kind of stuff, bringing up, but you need to have this arc like 2-3 stages out. Like I think that's one of the things that went wrong with Integral in the first place. It's like, oh, we second stage, we arrived. Like arrived. No, you've arrived at fucking adulthood.
Yeah,
this is where adulthood starts.
Yeah.
You've arrived at the beginning.
I love it. Dude, that happens to me all the time. I climb this huge mountain. I'm like, yes, I can finally do it. I'm like, oh, I can like have a relationship with another person in like a healthy way. Like,
the child is to the adult as the adult is to the sage.
Yeah.
So something I thought from way early on in life is like the sage is not fucking optional anymore. If we want to survive as a species, then we need to have at least a critical mass of the population, if not most of it, towards that space instead of running around like underdeveloped fucking children.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the. I think we need more adults doing stuff. I think you're more optimistic.
This is a tricky question. Is it possible to get more sages before we have more adults? And I don't know. I definitely I agree we need more sages, but like I think Daniel's saying we need more adults before we even have a chance of getting more sages.
I'm saying sages sounds like blue sky to me at this point.
We are facing multiple challenges in terms of getting there, both from a cultural level, basic education, the whole neurotransmitter economy and everything. Like these things are severely compromising our ability to even get to adulthood. But to roll back and take a different tack on this, if you haven't found any sense of metacognition or self-awareness by the time you've ended puberty, you're probably not going to find it. And if you haven't found it by your mid-20s, you're probably never going to find it unless trauma forces you to deal with it. So there are people who have that innate drive. We need to give them more effective tools and be able to follow that arc and encourage other people to follow along the same piece.
Yeah. That one like hits me.
I'm curious. I want to know more about this sage thing. Like, I also believe that we need more sages. I'm curious how we get more sages. What do you think in terms of how do we make more sages? How do we help there be more sages in the world? Is that each of us needs to just recognize the inner sage in other people, or is there specific practices that help sages come around?
Think within self. So this is a parallel developmental arc, I would say, between being a programmer and being an architect. So it doesn't take that much to learn how to be a programmer and solve some basic problems. to understand how to do architecture in complex systems is like an order of magnitude above that in terms of
right, complexity,
knowledge,
understanding,
everything else. Yes,
wisdom.
Right. Like all the time I'm hanging out with people and I'm like trying to do this like architectural like language of like, okay, how are we setting things up? Like what structure is just even our life or the next day or whatever going to be. And it keeps like, it's so hard to do that.
a lot of people just can't relate to it, and the people who are trying to stand in for that space better be fucking prepared to do it, or better be prepared to face some criticism. It's like we went through an esoteric revival 100 years ago. If you haven't done your basic fucking homework, don't be surprised when you're called out. I mean, there aren't that many people who can call these things out because they don't have the background. But when and where there are, it's like, why are we into this religion that's not a religion thing when people don't really have much in the way? Well, there's people who are into Buddhism and things like that because it's popular, but who's involved in extant mystery traditions? It's not that they don't exist. Yeah, they're a little more rare and hard to find, but there's a whole domain of space within there as well. So if you're serious about it, why haven't you done your homework?
All right, let's popularize this. No blaming other people. We're adults. We're taking responsibility for what's going on. There's not enough mystery traditions in the liminal space. Let's do it. I think you're going to be our point person right now. So this is me doing my homework, talking to you.
Yeah. So one of the ways that I would approach it is, I think, just two branches I would take on. So I would like to train something like ChatGPT on the folklore database, so that becomes familiar with all those human stories. I think that's probably a great way of being able to generate stories from the archetypes, the same type of narrative arcs, but reinvigorate them in some capacity.
Okay. I don't understand that. Walk me through it.
Okay. So predictive text models are basically a line of best fit through the training data.
All right.
Because they are predictive text, they're figuring out what is the most highly associated chain within this string of language that we're building.
Right.
So that's basically taking a mean through the orthodoxy. It's not able to tell you whether the orthodoxy is right. It's not able to tell you where the boundary of the orthodoxy fails.
Right. This is also why I hate it so much, because if you want the mainstream opinion, you can go ask ChatGPT. But if you want the alternatives, it's very, very bad at like, actually the alternative opinion is.
It's very unreliable, but like it could process a lot very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically, it's able to NPC faster than humans can NPC.
Yeah, and that's super useful, but it's not like
it can be a useful tool in a lot of contexts, but when we have to deal with more like higher order and more complicated questions, it's not going to cut it.
Right, it rapidly runs out of a relevant resource to us.
Well, it doesn't have like it's not able to model reality properly. Like it's modeling what people say reality is, I guess.
Right.
It's modeling the orthodox narrative in large part. Now, if there's enough training data in there, you can push it.
One option would be to generate an orthodoxy of greater complexity that is not a unified orthodoxy, but like a varied, like it has different opinions about the world rather than the one mainstream construct.
Train it up on mainstream data, and then do secondary training on specific sets of data, like the folklore database or other data structures of this type, because it does narrative very well. That's the one space it's able to do fairly effectively. You can knock out a film treatment or even parts of a script or things like that. Like one of the things I see in the TV media now is like they will take some really shitty books and make a pretty fucking awesome TV show out of it, because the only thing they needed to license was the bones of the story and the characters. The writer's room takes care of making that into an actual coherent presentable story.
Right.
But the generation of those first principal pieces of it, the main characters, what those characters like, the main story arc, that seems to be much more difficult, because I don't think they don't want to do a bunch of stuff that's green. They want to have something that's got some kind of an audience, so there's a hook to draw people in.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of shows that I've seen, when you go and look at the source material, like Dexter, like I thought that was some of the best writing that was on television up until season 5 or so. when I read one of the original books, I was like, how did they make this piece of crap into that? Like,
Yeah.
who had that vision to take this pig's ear and turn it into a silk purse? Because they did it somehow.
Yeah, I found the magicians like that. The TV show, The Magicians, like that as well. The TV show was amazing, but then the books were not.
All right, I'm not familiar with that one.
I don't know either. Okay, so we train a ChatGPT on that orthodoxy, then a second round of training on other corpuses, including, you said, fairy tale.
Yeah, well, I think Peterson's trying to do this right now with the biblical corpus and stuff like Milton's Paradise Lost and a few other things. To have a predictive text model that's trained off of that secondary source, so that it can speak more to that voice. That's kind of similar to what I envisioned for training off the folklore database or other types of sources like that, where we have this great repository of like human history and storytelling. A lot of the fundamental pieces are still there, like the way you talked about the Grimm fairy tales. Like the essential elements and the broad strokes of the story are there, but we keep refining these stories because the structure works, but the finesse details that actually bring us into immersion within that story have to be updated to continue to speak to people.
Right, because you got to translate it for modern audiences.
Issues with that term from Critical Drinker, but yeah, you need to make it culturally relevant.
Right.
So if I was going to rewrite the Freemasonic ritual at this point, I wouldn't use the biblical liturgy. I would use programming metaphors.
Right.
So literally become a mystery tradition of learn to code. So people say, I don't understand computers. No, what you don't understand is rational fucking logic.
Yeah.
That's why you're lost.
So
Computers
it's like
aren't cold robotic stuff. They have everything in this technology space has emerged out of human comprehension and our ability to parse in and find patterns or see where patterns have emerged.
right. So like Freemasons, like, because we don't work with stone so much anymore, so now it's programming masons or free programmers.
Computers are still a lithic technology because you're using basically silicates with dope semiconductors to create a p or an n-type semiconductor. It's still functionally electric lithic technology with a combination of electricity.
Oh,
I don't know.
So it's not even new.
I don't know. I'd also say you don't hit it with a hammer anymore unless you're really angry.
Yeah. So essential metaphors are there, but they continue to be refined for cultural time frame.
I mean, that's fair. Like, we're still an atom-based technology, so like whether you're making stones or making computers, you're still working with the nature of matter, and so all of those metaphors should still apply. Although there is the way that we have computing right now, we have like a virtual environment that is far separate from the atoms that it's running off.
Fuck, wait, oh my god. Yeah. Sorry, yeah, the computer thing clicked. Yeah, I feel like I'm working on that. I didn't get it before. Because but we take a different angle, like so there's the model of hierarchical complexity, and so that's got like all the different levels of, like, you got like the different levels of complexity, and so you can put in computers in there essentially and see how it builds up from, which is like essentially binary, like on off, to, I guess, like right now we have AI, like, you know, some sort of AI. And if you break
much more deeper, but think about it at the language level. We've moved from telling linear narrative stories to speaking in narratives that describe systems and schema.
Yeah, that's a level. That's a different level of abstraction.
So that's this moving from cognitive chunking into schema-based thinking, which is
right. And so those are different levels of abstractions. And so like, I think this is the thing people don't understand is like to be able to talk or to move to the different levels and know what level you're on and know when you're moving and like what's appropriate for that level and what's not. And you can use computers as like a metaphor for that because they do it it's like very straightforward.
It's at least relatable enough that's something most people can grasp.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a massive amount of, like, you don't have to spend 20 years meditating in a fucking cave to understand it. You can go and spend like a week watching YouTube videos or reading a couple books,
Right.
and then put your hands to the task. So you to piss off James Lindy, you're going to gain some gnosis.
What?
So it's not going to be, you're going to gain some gnosis or knowledge.
Gnosis. Yeah.
So there's the whole thing kind of ripping on Gnostic tradition that's basically just taking the Christian Gnostic heresy, pretending it's not a heresy. The problem with Gnosticism wasn't gnosis, it was reductionism. So reductive models will always fail. They can't account for the complexity of the system.
Well,
the idea about true knowledge is the Platonic sense of knowledge. I can tell you town is 2 miles away, but unless you walk to town, you don't actually know it's 2 miles away. It's received knowledge. It's not actually experiential knowledge. The observance thing is one thing. Working with something, working with some kind of a tool, and understanding how to come to mastery with that tool is another kind of step beyond that in terms of being a refined learning process.
Yeah, it like really forces you to be in touch with reality. The what's it called, the reductionist model stuff I like, as long as everybody remembers like this is one level of abstraction and it works for the certain things and it doesn't work for other things.
But by and large, people don't remember.
But that's the problem, is everybody decides
the icon becomes the stand-in.
Yeah, they need to pick a side, and like, what the hell, why do you have to pick a side? Just say this thing is good for this and this is what it does, and like there's also the rest of the world too.
Well, like the real world is multidimensional. It exists on at least 3 physical axes and plus the axis of time. So if we're going to model things effectively, they have to have multidimensional aspects in the way we're able to structure and lay out that topology.
Right. And whatever thing you decided.
So the dichotomies, we can start at the most basic level dichotomy, like component processing or something like that. But then you have to move into there's a chain that I talked about. It's like complexity within modeling. You go from point to line to area, to volume, to abstraction, to calibrated abstraction. Most people are operating at dichotomy. Where we need to be operating is calibrated abstraction. And you can't keep abstracting out because you're basically building a castle on sand. It's like within software.
Abstraction on abstraction is just kind of like navel gazing.
You're not going to go more than 3 classes deep because it adds too much complexity into the system, which is going to create brittleness. So again, you're going back to that. You have your abstract class, you come to a concrete implementation. If that concrete implementation doesn't work, then you go back, you do some refactoring, you're not changing how it works, you're not changing what it does, you're changing how it gets to what it does in a more efficient manner. So maybe the code is ugly through the first pass because we're just kind of sketching and breaking things out. And then once the algorithm has been sorted, you can go back and implement that in a much more constrained and refined manner.
Damn. Yeah, dude. Yeah. I used to be Scrum Master, so I used to like do this stuff. Where like they're like, oh, we have to get it right. The product, we have to get it right 100% right the first time. I'm like, this is never gonna happen. You need to like iterate.
Well, like there's waterfalls, one thing, Kanban or
Agile,
like something else. I think Agile is basically a Kanban system that takes responsibility off the management for all their fuck ups.
But you're supposed to like actually.
What you probably need is a system that goes in between the different levels of abstraction, this time in a corporate environment, that permits each level to operate efficiently and effectively, while letting the other level operate in a different way, efficiently and effectively. That's we just need a bridge that like lets the artist do the art and the accountants do the accounting, and not tries to make accountants do art or artists do accounting. Yeah, that's the Scrum Master.
Communication is happening through API layers rather than everything kind of being entangled and passing information kind of back and forth. So it's more towards service-oriented architecture. In terms of the development pathway, there was a methodology called Fusebox, which I don't know whether it's used anymore, but this guy Helms, they would do the planning stage of the software. So 80% of the effort was in planning and tracing out every aspect of what the software actually had to do, writing the test cases around that. And then when that model was complete and coherent and handled, like all we do as programmers is take business rules, ideally business architecture, and put it into software. That's what our job is. If the people coming up with don't even have fucking business rules, or it's just like some kind of
yeah,
nonsense.
That's what I mean. It's not really
it's hard
your
to
job.
get there.
Yeah. Yeah, like that's what you guys want your job to be, but it's not really that. It's really
a lot
like
of times we actually have to understand what the hell they're trying to say, turn that into some coherent, rational explanation, and then turn that coherent, rational explanation into some kind of application.
Yeah, it's what problem are they trying to solve, and then you're like, okay, I'm gonna like solve it from a programmer's perspective. Because if you're just doing what they say, like they don't always know what they're saying.
So
most of the time they don't have a clue.
Yeah.
One thing I'm interested in here is that I can
but
see
that's entrepreneur life. Like that's how that works. you need everyone else's help to solve everything. You're just there to like be the point person.
So one thing I'm interested in is I can see that we've got like the base level of reality, and if we're talking about programming, we're talking about almost the binary, and to modify the binary is very powerful. In terms of impact, you can actually change the 1 to a 0, the 0 to a 1, but that has nearly nothing to do with what I want when right now I'm staring at my computer. That doesn't really help me when I want to talk to Jason and Daniel on a Zoom call, right? I like being able to move a couple of ones and zeros has very poor scale, and so I want to be able to operate at a very high scope but have impact on that very, very small scope. Like I want all of this complexity, and I want to be meeting.
Micromanaging.
Yeah,
you've got the ones and zeros at the chip level.
Right,
above that, you have the hardware abstraction layer.
Right. Yep.
Above that, you have the language abstraction layer, and it's the language abstraction where we're actually thinking about working. This other stuff is basically like limbic system, DNA, all the biological subsystems.
Yeah, dude, we're doing it. We're matching the levels together. So like so like the cool thing about the matching the levels, right? Like is that the programmers can understand the biology now, and then like people that understand the biology can understand programming, and so you're able to like teach people stuff really quickly, which is like that's like the simple way of.
Are you guys familiar with Robert Sapolsky?
I know who he is. I know very little of his actual work.
People say names to me a lot.
He's an evolutionary endocrinologist from Stanford University. He has a introduction to human and evolutionary biology lecture series on the Stanford YouTube channel. It's about a decade old now, but it's probably one of the best resources that everybody should check. So the molecular biology piece, when he was walking through DNA, there was so much shit in there that is like part of best practices in software. They've got these like the code management or the source control management. So you can have things written into the genome. Well, they're not actually contiguous. When it goes at runtime, it's able to take, this was written here, because we're further down the track, this is going to be tacked on to the end. And then at runtime, it's able to go, oh, you two are actually, you're part of the same gene, so we'll write you together. When you're spooling up new proteins from that, so each gene is related to, genetics are related to a protein generation. At the runtime, this gene can be coded to make cells that will produce X, Y, and Z proteins. They can also spool up, I want 4 X's, no Y's, 2 Z's. Those variations can happen at runtime. And they're not about methylation or epigenetic effect of like turning things on and off, they're environmental response. So you've got this low level response. Above that, you have, or below that, you have epigenetic response. And then below that, you have genetic response or mutation layer. So there's another, but some of the stuff that I saw in the molecular biology, it was just like, this is software best practices. We haven't learned or invented, or we've learned, but we haven't invented anything at all. Maybe
it's like we weren't first.
Same kind of patterns that are functionally part of reality, and we've figured out how to code them into language that we can actually understand.
Right.
But within genetics, there are so many parallels to software architecture and best practices. It blew my mind the first time I went through it. It's something I have to go back through and do like a full mapping of this concept.
Dude, let's
here,
do that
maps to this
together. I
concept
want to
here.
do that with you. I'm very excited.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a little structure thing. I think will be cool. It'll be easier to do, to put into. That's so cool. Wait, so and how does this tie back into Freemasons? Connect this there, because right, because like this is all this stuff. Yeah.
Well, I know the thread
So-
that we followed. We followed the thread.
In
No,
this
no,
up-
no.
in
I'm not
this up-
interested in the thread we followed.
Okay.
I want to know how.
So in the
like,
update of Freemasonry, these are the kinds of pieces that we would be building the object lessons around. Here's software
Okay.
parallel, here's a genetic parallel, any other systems where we can see the same pattern. You develop a narrative or a story to speak to system 1, and then you develop an
Yes.
object lesson to speak to system 2.
Yes, that's what I want to do. This is awesome. And so is there like stuff within Freemason that is already like some of this is developed, or is this like gonna have to be kind of new, or like I guess
The
like
ritual structure there,
the next iteration?
the ritual structure is there, but I think the liturgy basically has to be built up from scratch.
Okay,
Maybe
so we
they're-
have to build the
they're-
literate.
Maybe the Blue Lodge stays there, but build another chain off of the Blue Lodge that actually addresses like this whole software pattern thing. But every lodge that's under the United Grand Lodge of Yukon is men only. There are co-Masonic lodges out of the French tradition. There's actually lodges of Lady Masons in Toronto. I think they buy their
Ooh.
work from the Grand Lodge of Ontario, but by and large, Freemasonry doesn't speak to most women because it's all temporal spatial stuff. It's certainly going to speak to some, but it might not have a wide resonance. Whereas the work I was doing with the ABN, the ritual structure there was very much balanced between masculine and feminine, and each of the officers' positions, there was basically a masculine and female role for each one of those layers.
Okay.
So there are
Okay. So
extant
you're
mystery
building.
traditions where the structure of ritual can be built out. It's a matter of making a liturgy that will speak to people, and also making the liturgy that actually conveys what you want it to convey. So some of that's some
Yeah.
trial and error stuff.
Yeah,
Try-
because
try-
you got to do the psychotech correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
essentially.
And
And
it's
then the
basically
narrative
got to be
stuff.
tested and proven. And okay, we've done this. What does it look like 2 weeks down the road, 2 months, into a year and beyond? Are these, it
Dude,
needs
this
to be
is
assessed. It's
awesome.
like, are these actually making the changes that we're expecting them to be made?
And yeah, give me. I need a process. I need to let my systems catch up.
I'm curious. My sense is the liminal web is still working itself out around the masculine feminine dynamic, and I suspect you might have ideas about where it needs to go with that. What are your thoughts on what it needs to do? Obviously, we live in a very complicated external culture, and we're like this little liminal web bubble within that, where we're trying to do better.
I think the first thing we need to do is get the overprotective mommy bullshit out of the public square,
Right.
because that infantilizes people and it compromises their ability to learn or challenge.
Yeah, I have
My-
the sense that we don't have a good model of healthy masculine or healthy feminine.
Yeah, I'm more on the side we need to create the other half versus get rid of the half that already exists.
We need a model of femininity that is adult and resilient.
Right. I also think
Yeah.
we need a model of masculinity that is more mature than
Yeah, by far.
the ones that are popular at the moment. And obviously the
everybody's-
like
it's the
historic
alpha male
traditions.
thing. I mean, part of that is
Yeah.
deconstructing these ideas about alpha male, and so another point I'll challenge Peterson on. He always uses the term dominance hierarchy, or I forget what he moved
Mhm.
on to after that.
Dominance hierarchy. Yeah.
He used another term later, I forget what it was, but I'd rather use the term influence hierarchy, because you have hierarchies on the male and female side. They have different mechanisms of influence. Dominance is a very fucking crude mechanism.
Well, I call it like a adolescent
So
mechanism.
it's just it's crude, it's unrefined. I'd say more like 2-year-old. But the
yeah, fair
dominance
enough.
thing is the kind of the crudest approach you could take to that. If you
Yeah.
influence through integrity, competence, like those are other mechanisms of influence.
That's like
got
very
a whole
masculine.
other set of well, there's a whole other set of influences that work within female spaces as well.
Right. They use
So
different.
if it's an influence hierarchy, you have these different permutations that can affect that, whether it's affecting, you know, kind of adult level relationships or like hacking the meat bag to like strongman exploits or different types of stuff like that, or the overprotective mommy thing, like figuring out, okay, it's influence first, and then what are the mechanisms of influence of under that actually allow these different modes of engaging and pulling people together.
I like this. One of my senses before you had said this of what's going wrong with the masculine feminine type dynamic is that we are going on the extremes of the polarity, and then we're pulling even harder on the extremes, and we're going further on the extremes, and so you get this the unhealthy
it's reductionist, just a reduction of detail and finesse,
right,
push out to those extremes.
And so then walking back from the extremes looks like delicate nuance, and you know, we're moving from dominance to influence is that sense of moving back from the extreme on that polarity to the like more nuanced version,
from dominance to competence,
right?
I mean, if that's the base level male,
well, it's that movement, but we'll have to do it in like 100 different dynamics, and we'll just have to keep finding the ones that were extreme and like walk back to the nuance and demonstrate the strength of the nuance. Very interesting. I like it.
You finished steeping there, Daniel?
Yeah, I didn't. I wasn't listening for the last like 2 minutes. This is good though. Like this is like really good deep conversations. I find they tend to like unlock things inside me, and then like I'm seeing things while we're talking. The thing that's like really interesting, like that's like popping up like very salient for me is the shamanistic practices of like creating the scenarios, or I don't know exactly even how to describe it, but it's like living a life so that people gain the life lessons that you want them to learn, so that like you guys can work together better or something.
Cool. I think part of what we're missing in modern culture is the rites of passage thing. So
Yeah,
that should basically precede the mystery tradition piece. Earlier rites of passage should be like somewhat traumatic within the stress range.
Yeah,
They should challenge you in some capacity. And the same thing when you move from the rites of passage. So we wouldn't go from childhood to adulthood. Now we go from like childhood to teenager. Okay, now you're a teenager. You can't use these childish methods anymore, or we're going to treat you like a little child.
Yeah.
And there's just, you play those games, that's what you fucking get. And then the same thing moving from teenage or adolescence into adulthood. It's like, okay, you've, as an adolescent, you've got more flexibility than you had as a child, you've got more responsibility. And as an adult, you do the same kind of incremental jump. And if you fail that, like either you fail the initiatory process or you go through that and you start showing the old modes again, well, we're just going to fucking treat you like that. If you can't adult the fuck up and like deal with it, then we are going to treat you like a child. And until you can act like a adult, sorry, that's the way it is. No fucking excuses. And no, it'll be okay. And playing enabler to like bullshit. It's like, you have to step up to the level. We're not going to put any barriers in your way. You create enough all on your own.
Yeah.
But
I was a male teenager.
You're going to have to go through basically like a selection process for special forces is effectively what we need. If you want to be considered an adult, you have to go through the selection process and prove you're actually a fucking adult.
Yeah. I can see how the what you're calling rites of passage is like, even if someone fails a rite of passage and they're like, no, I don't want to be, if they say like, I don't want to be that sort of adult yet, I'm not ready to be mature, then at least they know they're still a teenager. Or if the parts of them that are teenager want to rule the roost, at least they know how it's going to be until they're ready to grow up. Like
Yeah.
that's the like, oh, if you're still a teenager, we will throw you in prison if you're a 30-year-old and you're not acting with respect to the rest of society. We will just throw you in prison. That's kind of what we do. But kind of like often we don't tell the parties what the rules of the game are. You know, at some point you're just an equal adult with the rest of society, and you don't realize what the rules of the game are, and then you speed and then you get in trouble. You're like, why did no one help me like stick to the rules if the rules were going to be there? Well, we're kind of like not scaffolding our teenager. Right.
Yeah, that's part of the infantilization problem. Like there's critical learning periods early on. Like kids need to be exposed to some danger. If they're 6 months old and they're walking around and they fall over, the chances of them hurting themselves unless they land on something sharp is like fucking non-existent.
Right.
They'll get a bit of a bump. They might cry or whatever. As soon as the parent runs over, they're freaking out. Oh my God, are you? Well,
yeah, you train their nervous system to freak out.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you think you just trained your
child abuse?
Yes, it is. It's a pernicious form of abuse.
Yeah, I've seen parents where they don't let their kids. Yeah, they don't let their kids do anything. Like they'll move the kid's legs and everything, and like the kid can't like it's weird because it's like it wasn't dangerous and now it probably is dangerous because your kid has
like no like reaction mechanisms because oh my god,
yeah, like a toddler falling, like they fall like that, they're the right size to be getting the injuries that they're getting, right? But then when
the trip to the ground's pretty short, they got lots of fat, their bones are soft, like the chances of real injury is pretty low. So that's why this is the opportunity for them to learn really fucking basic lessons so they don't have to do it when they're 20 or 12 or whatever. Like it needs to be learned very early on, and then it can become refined. So if you impair someone's development that early, the chances of them ever becoming an adult is almost non-existent unless they dedicate a massive amount of time and effort into overcoming that shit. It's going to be exceedingly difficult. And
there's not a lot of good
structure. Personal experience.
No, yeah,
I'm also interested in, you know, if I momentarily perceive myself as the child needing to cross the border into the adulthood, or the adult needing to cross the border into the sage, like I'm going like, oh, if this is what it's like to play with the rules of a child, what is the next step of maturity for people to start treating me like an adult, or the next step of maturity for people to start treating me like a sage? What's it going to look like for me to want to move forwards down that pathway? Which is very interesting. I'm like, oh, these are the ways in which I'm screwing up and I need to like cut that out. These are the ways that I need to like grow up in this part of my life so that I'm ready to be treated like the sage that I would like to be appearing as.
Yeah. I think it's all about metacognition and responsibility. Like you need the self-reflective aspect, or there's no error correction mechanism. If you don't have the responsibility to understand what's my issues, what's their issues, where's the boundary point in between, then you don't have a way of effectively gauging or setting where those boundaries are. So there's the two aspects of that have to work together.
Yeah, and we need like systems, I think, as well, that we can kind of all agree like these are about the rules. These are the approximate rules. These are approximate boundaries. And there's something about having like systems that everybody. Sorry?
It's setting principles rather than rules.
Sure. Yeah.
These are the principles that we operate from. If we do the rule thing, then we're like, you're checkboxing, or you're doing like a call center pathway to a response, or you're back to the 10 commandments. Whereas if we work from principles, you understand how those principles work in different applications, different contexts, when things are added or taken away from that environment, how they actually influence how those principles interact with each other. So again, we're doing that shift from system 1 level thinking into system 2 level thinking, the shift from cognitive chunking into schema and process.
It's like I'm thinking of like all of these metaphors of growing up in skill, like training wheels or like bumper bars on the bowling alley. And they're like, oh, if rules are like what you need to do for a child, guidelines are what you should do for the adult. And then like the sage lives in a world with no rules and no guidelines, and they're working it out on their own. And we should respect them for that. Maybe. I don't know. Does that fit for you?
principles would be the last one.
Principles,
so
not guidelines.
Rules to guidelines to functioning from principles, because you understand things from first principles. You're able to work
right
up and down that process,
and of course, you can break every principle in the book if you see the better opportunity or the right way to go. You can break principles as needed, but if you break rules, you should expect trouble.
They shouldn't. It shouldn't really. Like, you still need to
They
respect
probably
rules
wouldn't.
introducing principles.
But it's the same balance. If you understand the rules effectively, you know where they can or cannot be broken, and to
Right.
what extent, and to how much error that's going to occur, or how much failure that's going to occur. So we may trade off a small error on this specific rule where we're going to have a huge gain on this other side. And if it all works out, that is an appropriate trade-off, because there's no perfect option. It's all about making the best you can with the least shitty decisions,
Right.
because it's all trade-offs from top to bottom.
Right.
So
Yeah,
we need to
you're
figure
trying
out
to maximize
what the-
utility. Long-term
utility and
utility, not short-term.
efficacy from like top to efficacy in a much efficacy and integrity in a much broader understood context. So
In
again,
like an
moving from-
altruistic way. Yeah.
That's selfish altruism, I think, because if you're making stupid decisions that have poor impacts on other people, you're kind of shitting in the water supply.
Yeah.
If you actually, so the whole system has to work functionally, and that's the higher order perspective that has to be understood, working against or within these contexts.
Yeah, so it's like a systems thinking, effective altruism level. It's one of our things that we
like. Something I'm resting on in this moment is that like structural, like we're building a hierarchical understanding of child, then adult, then sage. This is very, very structural. I worry that step into sagehood, like the adult understands the child understands being under the hierarchy. The adult understands making the hierarchy, and the sage is like, you know, we're another dimension. It's like you said with the line, the dot to the line to the 3-dimensional to the abstract. The sage is making a leap from 3-dimensional to that, hopefully 3-dimensional to abstract. They're not in hierarchies anymore. Like they're on a different map or something.
To a degree, I mean, these are container spaces that map out to species level and individual level developmental arcs.
Right.
So we're just kind of repeating and breaking out the same process. You have a container space, but it's the outer container. There's nothing saying how that internal space has to be divided within there. It's just there is a boundary condition between this space and this space up here. It doesn't say anything about what the topology inside of that space is. So there's ways to address variation within that container space, but there's still a clear boundary between the child container and the adolescent container.
Well, I guess the thing I'm asking about is when does
and
the topology
there's probably going to be
exist?
multiple of them. So
my question is, when does the topology start existing inside the container rather than pretending to be on the outside of the container?
I think it's inherently inside of the container. So
right, but children don't pick to be at the bottom of the hierarchy in the same way that adults pick to be on top of the hierarchy. They're just participating in it, and then I'd like to believe the sage becomes self-aware about such structures, and they can then
not.
Then they're not a sage, right? But then in sort of trying to invite people into the world where, let me see if I can put this into words. Invite people into the world where they're in dynamic play with the structures that they are living by. The rules have to start melting away, I guess. Like things get really wibbly up here.
It's like mastering any skill. You go through the process of learning what the new rule set is, and when you've mastered the rule set, then you can move beyond the rule set and understand how those things play. So you've got more flexibility.
Right.
You've learned your scales. Now you can do freeform jam.
Mm-hmm.
So that developmental space of like applying the discipline to any type of activity is, for me, kind of the core psychotechnology. It's the application of discipline that lets you become more refined. It doesn't really matter what that is, whether it's like shooting a gun, bow and arrow, swinging a hammer. Yeah, all that stuff follows the same kind of developmental arc. And those arcs are repeated at every kind of stage of development. They never look the same because they're local variations in what's going on, but the generalizable design pattern is repeating over and over and over again.
Yeah, I'm seeing the
bones of the structure there, but the permutations are changing.
I'm seeing the transition from like playing scales on the piano to playing jazz on the piano to being able to play music by tapping the side of the piano and making it a good performance and making it enjoyable for people to hear, which is like suddenly the instrument has completely changed. Like potentially everything is completely different. At that, like the leap to sage or the leap to great mysterious structures.
I don't know that it's a leap, like it's not an instantaneous alignment. It's like constant ongoing process.
Right.
So you might be in sage space, weekends, but not at work. Or the reverse.
Right.
Or, it's
in
about
and out.
the aspect of discipline within those spaces. Am I spending more time here or more time here? Or is there actually an explicit boundary where I have to pass some kind of selection process to go from here to here? So if there's anything relating around competence, whether it be technical or cognitive, like policy development, those kind of things, there needs to be a fucking selection process. We have abject fucking idiots driving policy right now. I have no idea what they're talking about. They don't
you've been listening to the news, have you? Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've seen this with gun control for years. The stuff that passed in Canada with C-21. It's like, oh, we want 5-round magazines. Well, you already fucking have them. We don't want assault rifles. Well, automatic firearms have advanced since 1967. We want red flag rules. Well, anyone within education or health is required to report anyone they notice who might be a potential harm to themselves or others. It's like, it's already fun there. Could you read the law and like understand some basic shit before you start waving your hands and everything has to change about things you don't even remotely fucking understand? And that's without even getting into the function of firearms and everything else. It's like these people are fucking crayon eaters and they're deciding what is going to happen in the lives of millions of people.
I love the colorful metaphor. I love crayon eater as a slur. That's great. These people are crayon eaters.
There's one of your clips.
Yeah. I'm like, yep. Okay, so let me look back to creating a mystery tradition. So we are trying to scaffold people into sage. That's sort of what we're talking about. We want people to grow out of crayon eating.
Yeah.
Well, to the extent that I want to live in a world with more sages, I'm willing to put some energy and effort towards scaffolding such a thing.
And it's more adults as well. I mean,
right.
There needs to be
I'd like that as well.
That
yes.
sage thing in order to define an architectural plan, any aspect of topology, whether it's like energy farming, whatever else. You need someone who understands the domain and is intelligent enough to actually see things at an architectural level. Like the only opinions that are relevant to policy are informed ones. And if people haven't even done the basis of like understanding existing legislation and how it works, it's like your opinion's not fucking relevant. Sorry, it's not, period.
Yeah.
Do your homework, stop acting like an infant, do your fucking homework, come prepared to have a real discussion about legitimate points. Great, no problem. But if this tantrumy bullshit about things people don't even understand, it's like, I'm so fucking tired of that. Utterly disgusted by it. And I see that as our biggest existential threat.
Ourselves acting like children.
If we're led by people who have no functional cognitive capacity, we are on a direct line for extinction real fucking quick. Because the world's not getting any simpler. The problems are getting more complicated. Everything else is getting more complicated. We've got a higher population.
I'd say that
which also
we're getting
acted
more and
as-
more intertwined as a society across international levels as well. Like it's getting there's more and more nuance and more details on so many more dimensions. The problem's
there's
getting
more
harder
and more
faster.
ways of influencing different types of systems, and like there needs to be a structural overhaul, or we will not survive.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure about that. Because like I think you're right, like it's things are run by crayon eaters, but there's like an underlying like the principles or whatever, like the underlyingness is actually like pretty sound with in regards to democracy. And like the way our systems are set up. Like not in Canada, but like let's say the US more.
Well, the US is a constitutional republic. I mean, the issues I have with democracy is it's mob rule in slow motion.
Right. And that sucks,
So, I mean,
but the slow motion is like a huge feature that I think is underrated because we don't have to
But with
be
technology, it's not slow motion anymore. So I think
Right.
constitutional
Right,
monarchy,
but-
which is effectively what the pattern of Freemasonry is, you have a master of the lodge, but they are elected. Ideally, they've been trained through all of the different positions up to that point, so they understand the scope of the organization in its entirety, and they're bringing some institutional knowledge along. And once they've left that chair, they're maintaining institutional knowledge within it. So it forces a more organic structure in terms of that kind of development.
so
And
like US
if
is
you
kind of like that,
leave
no?
everything is democracy, you're leaving an evolutionary niche for exploitation by bad actors. This people, especially at this point, they like I see Trump and Trudeau as the same. Anybody, I understand the fuck you vote from Trump, but if you actually think that Trump's a serious candidate or Trudeau's a serious candidate, you're intellectually broken.
I don't
Sorry,
I don't
I
think that.
can't say that any nicer. These people are just
How are
like,
Trump and
thoughts.
Trudeau, they're the opposites. Or like
No,
Trudeau's very
they're on opposite sides of the aisle. They appeal to the same cognitive level. They're appealing to the same
Yeah.
class of person, just in different sides of the aisle. I don't see.
I
I
mean,
don't see any difference
kind
between
of.
liberals and conservatives.
but
It's like
that's their
neither one
job
of them
though.
can develop. But
The job of a good
here.
politician
Yeah,
is to appeal
but I'm
to the
saying like
level
that's the system.
of its constituents.
Like because I'm sure there are great people that would make great candidates, but they're not able to get the job, so they're not even playing the game. So you get
Well,
like
they're not
I
able
think
to play the politics game, and governance should not be about fucking politics.
yeah,
If we're going
kind
to
of
play
should.
the popularity.
Well,
I strongly
wait, slow
disagree
down,
at
slow
this
down.
level.
Okay, maybe we're not. Maybe this is a wrong direction for conversation. But
No,
yeah,
I think we can
we kind of should.
pull at this a bit without tearing ourselves apart. So
Okay.
the issue I have with democracy is you let everybody in the door unfiltered when we just come through this conversation about talking about selection process.
In terms of
Yeah.
voters or in terms of candidates?
So this is in general process anywhere where the outcomes and the consequences matter, you better have competent people making those decisions.
Mhm.
So let me give you an inverse example to kind of balance that out. If I was going into a company and I wanted to improve some internal business process, I'm going to do the first pass with the C-level executives, maybe the management layer. But if I want to understand what the fuck is actually going on, I'm going to talk to the people in the trenches because they're dealing with it every day and they understand.
Yep.
Both of those positions don't have entirety insight into the process.
Right.
So either one on their own is basically fucking worthless unless you've got people who can do the synthesis across those points.
Right.
So that's an analogous map to liberals and conservatives. They have more in common with each other than either has with functional adults. I don't consider either liberals or conservatives,
yeah.
anybody who aligns themselves to party politics, I can't consider them to be an adult because you're just following
the
along.
party-
Too much ideology.
There have to
Well,
be
I'll say the-
individual. Yeah,
I'll
it's
say
an
the party
ideological thing. You're
lines.
not making choices.
Yeah, the party lines are not like that. But I think sometimes the people go in and
The
they see that,
individuals.
they need the tribe. Yeah, the individuals, like they realize they need the power of the tribe to actually do things, and so they're operating on a different level, even though they're saying, like, even though they might be saying a lot of rhetoric, but that's them playing the game. Like that's them
or at least cooperating with party lines somewhat.
Well, there's a difference between laying all this stuff out as like a popularity contest, as opposed to we've done all this information gathering back and forth. We've done everything possible to try to.
But that's not their job.
An entire map, and then we're going to present that back to people for their buy-in.
Yeah, that's not their job.
Thing from the people. I think that's effectively what the job should be in governance.
Maybe, but that's not what it actually. That's not. It, like, maybe in a more ideal like governance situation, it would be. Like, I think if you want to run a company or a group of people or something, like, yeah, you need the people who are most competent to be the ones making the decisions. But with government, you actually don't want the competent people making the decision, running it, in charge. You want the people who are like not going to fuck things up and not going to use that power. People. Not necessarily, because like a competent person who's like able to do stuff and make good decisions and like knows how things work, they can take over the government and start doing things with it, right? You want the person there that's going to be like, I don't know how any of this works, I'm not going to touch any of it, and I'm just going to run out my term and just let everyone else can just live their lives, and we don't need to use this government apparatus except for like, if you nuke us, we'll nuke you back kind of situation.
But I think that points to an effective management strategy. Like, you don't get people on board and try to motivate them. You get motivated people, you do whatever you can to not demotivate them.
Yeah.
So they will be invested in process. They will work hard to make sure things work right. The best managers are hands off.
Yeah.
Right. So right. You let people do their job.
Yeah. There's a missing piece of this that I wanted to pull out of the TOGAF stuff for the enterprise architecture. So TOGAF is kind of constant. The model has changed, but it's this constant iterative process of looking at your problem domain, breaking it down into service components. Each of those are broken down. So you're tracking key performance indicators, tracking all of your different types of inputs, and that is documented. That's the first thing we need in governance is what are we spending on? Is it actually hitting the targets that we want to see? And this has to be a process that's actually open to everybody. So I think every citizen in a democratic frame should be able to go in and investigate all these things. You don't get to respond or make recommendations until you proved you're competent within those specific domains. Prove a competence level, by all means, come in. So the other piece with TOGAF is in this iterative process, in the center of that is what's called an architectural review board, which should be something like your Senate or your chamber of chamber of sober second thought. You need to have like not a single person at the center of this. You need to have a community of people who are competent, who can take out all these different inputs coming in, make coherent sense of them, make decisions about them, and get buy-in or push those changes out. So I think in terms of like mapping government, we need that map of like the enterprise architecture map. And then if you want to vote on something, I'm not going to vote for a fucking candidate. I'm going to vote on budget. I've got this many dollars in my tax base. I want this many to this ministry. I want this many to this ministry. I want this many to this ministry, and defense or whatever, like natural environment, doesn't really matter. Those ones I don't want to invest in as an individual citizen. Okay, fine. Maybe there should be a penalty along with that as well, where you don't reap any of the benefits of that system, or you only get the most base level benefits of that system. But you make the choice about what you want the government to invest in, how to spend its money, and not picking fucking cheerleaders. These are decisions that matter. Switching out a set of cheerleaders is just
I can see what you're saying.
Quicker and quicker.
I'm interested in, so here's one puzzle. One puzzle I see is that transitioning from the current type of government to that type of government involves the current ones willing to give up power. And I think that's going to be a really, really hard thing to get them to do. But what I think you can do is to start doing something like a digital democracy, start polling large collectives of people, or invite like a digital vote, a non-binding digital vote, because you obviously have to start non-binding because the current government is not going to agree to rename itself Bodie McBoatface by digital majority, right? So you need to somehow set up the initial non-binding sentiment vote system so that you can at least get the information. And then once you can get the information from the people, you can talk about whether we will or won't act on it, or, you know, and if a government acts strongly against its non-binding popular vote, that's when you can start having the conversation of like, do we even have the right government right now? But you need that information, and you need that information to be collectively available before we can start acting as a digital democracy collective. Otherwise, like, everyone thinks they know the right thing, but we don't actually know because we're not gathering the vote. I think
we have to get through the adult space first before those kinds of changes are implemented.
Right. We don't even have enough adults.
If you invite the children into that space, what the fuck is the point? We just got another variation of the shit we've already been through.
Right.
Which is clearly not working.
Well, I mean, interestingly, even the structure of such spaces, like, you know, if you take our digital social media, like our Facebooks, the structure of the feed is like highly influential about how we feel about it, like the order of the things that appear, and the positive or negative sentiment. And we went through this phase of a lot of outrage. I see a lot less outrage today than I did maybe 5 years ago. Like, we really went through an emotional wave because the structures that supported the engagement were monetized for engagement rather than monetizing for like things we actually humans might care about, like meaningfulness or, you know, being a better society. So we kind of need to get, and this is where the system architect comes in, like yourself, we need to get that system right so that it enables a fair play of the play field of like, what do we care about before we could even ask the adults, let alone the children, to vote. Like, we need that level play field.
So one of the things you look at in enterprise architecture is transitional architectures.
That's super interesting.
Kind of new system. It's not something you can spool up and.
Of course, you can't just blink.
Kind of switch. We're going to turn off the old system and turn on the new one, and just like fucking pray nothing, everything just doesn't fall apart at our feet.
Just everyone knows how to use the new system already.
You need to take service buses with under the main system, break those out, and develop a transitional architecture plan. It's like, okay, we can do this stage here. We're going to monitor and track what those inputs have on the system. Are we meeting our goals, or is this just like taking us further off the rails but you map all those stages out. And if you get, 3 stages in and go, whoa, this is going somewhere we didn't expect, we need to roll back and figure out how that process failed. So the iterative metacognition at an organizational level, that's what TOGAF brings to the table as a structure.
Right. Those interim states all need to be better than the last state. You can't have a bad interim to get to a good, like, people just won't go to the bad interim. People will fight you on the bad interim to get to a better. You actually need to build, I guess I'm seeing the topographic landscape of local minima. You can't go down local maxima. You can't go down the mountain to go up a taller mountain because people won't let you, like, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. We just don't like going down. So you have to build a bridge that goes like across the gap
to create a ridge between the
two. Yeah, that's right. So you got to find the ridge or like build the ridge or like make a bridge or somehow scaffold the journey across the gap of the topographic landscape.
Smaller trackable changes, and then watching what the outcomes are and implementing those slower all the time. So it's not just like, wah, wah, wah. It's like there's a clear gradient across the process of what you're trying to do, and you're kind of breaking that out so things are trackable. We can actually observe what's going on. What are these mechanisms of influence doing on this system? What kind of perturbations are we throwing at, and what are the responses of the system to the perturbations?
Yeah. Okay. That was an insight for me, because I suspect that I have many like personal instances of being at a local maxima, and then obviously not quite knowing how to get myself across the ridge to, like, I can see it could be better over here, but I can't quite get across the ridge. So then if I think about like, oh, my problem is I'm not good at the scaffolding right now, I need to better scaffold in between. Okay, that's a good point. Well, I mean, I also have methods that are a bit more mystical or magical, that have like the quantum wove, where you jump from one to the other, but I'm less good at actually orchestrating them than I am at the like slow scaffoldy, like consistent competency can get me from A to B. But interesting.
More dimensions. That's what I do. The more dimensions there are, the less
Well, that's
local maximum there are.
right. That's one solution, is to like keep turning the map through different dimensions until you find the ridge. Right.
Well, you just add more dimensions and then the energy.
Right.
And
Then
can't get locked as well.
then you're no longer in a local maxima. You're sort of like, oh, there's a maxima here, but there's actually a bridge kind of like off to the side now that I see it through this dimension.
So one of the things I've looked at in terms of mapping this space out, so we need to move from dichotomistic space into at least the area. So if you have space of experience here, the way, and it becomes untenable or uncomfortable, the way of moving out of that space is basically a nihilistic thing. So I think there's a parallel between Nietzsche and Zen Buddhism, where nihilism is used as a vector, not a destination. So you're pushing back against that nihilism. But if you're still in this position, you're just in nihilistic attachment rather than a direct attachment. So it's about being able to take those two spaces, the not this, and then the synthesis behind that to understand. So now you've created a triangle. Those different domains and spaces of experiences, you can start stacking those together to actually create like a topology or a landscape. I think that's a maybe a better way or a more intuitive way of mapping out what this kind of experience would look like. You gain confidence in different spaces of experience and understanding, and then architecturally you're able to put those or understand how those relate into a complete topology, so that they're not isolated silos. These things are interrelated with each other, and you understand how to move from one chain into the other or across these two different mountain ranges. And maybe the bridge building is understanding between this domain, what are the transitional pieces, and then building and scaffolding between those points.
You're reminding me of a like mental move that I worked out. I was working with someone once, and I realized how much I was at a dead end, and like the thing I was doing was just a dead end. And what you need to do when you're in a dead end is reverse out. And then when you reverse out, you can choose to take a different path. But there was a way in which I hadn't realized, and for quite a while I was like, why am I in a dead end? This dead end really sucks. And then on reversing out, I had access to like new strategies, new topographies, new possibilities. But there was this movement that was like, wait, first reverse out and then reconsider how to scaffold over the same distance. Which I mean, I only know it because I personally experienced feeling like I was dead-ended, and then needing to reverse in order to find new pathways. As opposed to, which is a completely different, like we're not on local maxima to higher mountain, we're actually at a dead end. Like, my bad, I backed myself into the dead end.
So with the nihilistic thing, one of the ways I used to describe this is like the solar slingshot thing in Star Trek. So if they needed to launch into space, the hyperjet or the hyperdrive is down. They fly towards a planet, get within the within the gravitational field of that, and then launch out into a new space.
So do that in real life too.
That's kind of a metaphor for how I see Nietzsche and Zen approaching nihilism. It's not complete negation, it's towards that space and then being able to pop out into a completely new space. Broadening out.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, we're I can see the like energetic structure conversation here. We're in. Like,
if it's just nihilism, then you're still fundamentally attached to that thing. You haven't changed the relationship, this fundamental structure of the relationship. You've just inverted it.
So one thread that is popping into my head sounds like we're going to have to move as a society, move closer to insanity before we can get more sages. Slingshot into like the better territory. We're going to have to, first it's going to have to get worse.
Well, at least going through those spaces, people are going to have to deal with their internalized traumas, and they're going to have to figure out how to face new situations that might be traumatic to them, which is just, that's building up resilience. That's becoming an adult, learning how to deal with significant challenges like that, whether it's like loss of a parent, loss of a partner, like the shit comes up in real life.
Oh
And
yeah.
if you don't have the psychotechnology or the psychological skills or temperament to deal with that, it's going to be devastating. So it could completely destroy you, or you could be in that position and be a rock for other people. So we really have to deal with facing uncomfortable things and uncomfortable questions, because if we don't, we're pushing that technical debt down the road.